On the morning of June 30, 1908, Sergei Semenov was having breakfast at his table in the yard, just as he did every morning. His house was located near the Tunguska region of Siberia. It was 7 in the morning, and the weather was at a level that could be considered warm for a country like Russia. At that exact hour, something happened that Sergei described after the event as follows. It was as if I saw a massive upheaval. The sky had split in two in flames. And I felt such a great heat that it felt as if the shirt on my back had superheated, he said. In great fear, he hid under the table he was sitting at. Right at that moment, a deafening sound came. It was like a massive, thunderous boom. Like hundreds, thousands of thunderstrikes happening at the same time. And the pressure that followed the sound shattered the windows and tore off the doors of all the houses in that area. The truly terrifying part was that Sergei was exactly 65 kilometers away from the point of impact. Despite being at such a distant point, he had felt the event very clearly. No one could figure out what happened that day in Siberia, this land of ice. The government could do nothing. Because Russia was very large in terms of surface area and civilian settlements were very sparse, no one was adversely affected. The government and other states were busy with other things at the time. People were not adversely affected, but approximately 80 million trees in the Tunguska forest were flattened in an instant, and for 19 years, no research was conducted regarding this event. So what was that giant phenomenon that altered that region? To understand this part, we need to go back to the beginning of the story, to the very beginning. Good evening and welcome back to History for Sleep. Tonight, we are stepping into one of the great blank spaces of our past. But before we go there, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. And before you drift off, I have a quick question for you. Why do you think an explosion powerful enough to flatten 80 million trees left absolutely no crater behind? Share your theory in the comments, and if you enjoy these quiet journeys, please like and subscribe. And now, dim the lights, let your shoulders soften, and let your breathing slow. Let's begin. Let's dive into this mysterious topic together. In order to understand such mysterious events that we cannot exactly name, or at least to have an idea, we need to understand the geography in that time. That is why we are now turning our route to the world of 1908. The world was very different in 1908 than it is now. Yes, although there is only 100 years between them, there were many differences, as you all will know. The revolution had not yet taken place in Russia, and a major global conflict, which would be one of the greatest conflicts in the world, had not yet happened. Airplanes were only 5 years old. Radios were very rare and something that only people who really had money could access, but whatever was known about the sky back then is the same as what is known now. Of course, there is a difference, but really, what do we know about the sky other than the movies we watch? According to what was detected on the morning of June 30, 1908, something was wandering over the vast Siberian region of Russia. At least that is how scientists reported it. An object coming from space that we have absolutely no idea what it was. This could have been a comet, it could have been an asteroid, or it could have been an alien ship. However, this incoming thing was coming at a speed of approximately 54,000 kilometers per hour in the Earth's atmosphere. We can understand the magnitude of this speed like this. Today, the speed of the airplanes we see in the air is on average 900 kilometers per hour. But these commercial airplanes are not the fastest vehicles we see. Let's think of jets. They can also reach a speed of 500 kilometers per hour on average. So this is the highest speed that all human history has been able to create. However, this incoming object was coming almost 60 times faster than this commercial airplane. And this object was over Siberia, famous for its freezing cold. Let's examine Siberia together. Even though we think of Siberia as consisting entirely of glaciers, this is one of the largest forested areas in the world. and it is so big that it covers approximately 10% of the Asian continent. Today, life in this region is seriously sparse. In 1908, however, not a trace of a human could be found in this region. In this freezing nothingness, there were hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of taiga, endless trees, swamps, and frozen rivers. Contrary to what I said at the beginning, a small group, meaning a group that could not spend 12 months of the year here, was also sustaining its life here. The name of this native community was the Evankis, the true natives of Siberia. The things these people did due to the freezing cold were truly limited. They herded reindeer, tracked wildlife, and set up camps. These are the things that can be done in this geography anyway, and on the morning of the great event, some members from this people were outside. On the morning the phenomenon occurred, Chutchancher and Chekharan were in the tent they had set up on the bank of the river. Later on, researchers found these people and asked them to explain the event. According to what the brothers told the researchers, they said that a cold wind blew suddenly and that they thought this incoming cold wind came because of an avalanche. However, subsequently, when they turned their faces to the direction the wind came from, they experienced shock. This wind had tossed them and their tent forward by an average of 1.5 meters. Chutchancher had also said these things. It was as if the sky had split in two. I saw a huge blazing light, and then that powerful sound had come. Afterwards, something threw me forward. He had expressed what he experienced in this way. Now, think for a second. The location where these brothers were was exactly 30 kilometers away from the point of impact. Yes, you are not hearing it wrong. 30 kilometers. For our American and British friends, this distance is 18 miles. You can calculate the sheer power of the event. Kosalapov, a farmer in the village of Vanavara located in the same region, was also saying similar things. He had said that the windows of his house shattered and the doors were torn off. And this village was exactly 70 kilometers away. This distance makes approximately 43 miles. Imagine. Even though there was this much distance in between, the windows still shattered. However, these two were not the only ones who experienced this phenomenon. The same thing was experienced in all the villages around the Tunguska region. In the city of Kansk, 600 kilometers away from the impact area in this region, a railway driver stopped his train. According to his statements, he too thought there was an earthquake. In Krasnoyarsk, meaning 900 kilometers away. Seismic instruments recorded the event, and the pressure wave created by the immense force circled the Earth twice. Yes, exactly twice. The interesting part of the matter begins exactly here. From the beginning, you thought that this object fell somewhere in Siberia, but you are wrong. This object did not crash into a region in Siberia. That massive phenomenon that flattened 80 million trees, that severely impacted many houses across 2,000 square kilometers. And that completely altered the Siberian landscape, never actually touched the ground. So how did it happen that this object, which did not even hit the ground, caused so much widespread effect? The atmosphere will give us the answer to this question. This object completely disintegrated while it was approximately 10 kilometers in the air before reaching the ground. In science, this event is called an airburst, meaning a massive energy release in the air. The reason the object fragmented in the air is its speed. You can think of it like this. If you enter cold water suddenly, your breath gets cut off, but if you enter it gradually, it will be easier for you. The object fragmenting in the air was also due to it entering the cold atmosphere quickly. The air condensing ahead of it heated the object and forced it to burst, but this mid-air burst did not reduce its sheer power. You can think of the magnitude of this event like this. You know, the most devastating human-made events recorded in modern history. The power of this natural phenomenon was exactly 185 times more powerful than those historic forces. Yes, you didn't hear it wrong, 185 times, and it hadn't even hit the ground. So what kind of findings were there at the place where the event occurred? I mean, what was the thing authorities found there? Come. Let me give you the answer to this question too. Nothing. No crater, no piece of meteoroid, no trace. Only flattened trees, scorched soil, and gaps opened up like a giant fist from the sky. The Russia of 1908 did not seriously dwell on this issue, and this matter was ignored for a long time. But this was an understandable situation because there were many internal challenges in the Russia of that period. At that time, Russia was under Tsarist rule. And things were really not going well. It had been involved in a major international dispute with a country like Japan, and it was trying to maintain its existence amidst the severe setbacks it had experienced. The threats were not only coming from the outside, there were also internal problems. Revolutionary movements were taking shape. The region we call Siberia is a difficult place to reach even today. It covers a very large part of Russia. Reaching any region in Siberia was much more difficult in those times. It took weeks for journalists to get there. The fact that no lives were lost in the event was considered unimportant by the authorities, and they ensured that it was quietly put aside. 19 years after the event occurred, the Tunguska forest was in a severely impacted state, just like the first day. During this time, a major global conflict had come and gone. The Russian Revolution had happened. Internal unrest had emerged. Lenin had passed away, and Stalin had taken over. Amidst all this chaos, the Tunguska forest was waiting to be explored. Actually, these initial challenges were the reason why this place was left untouched, and Tunguska had to wait until the calendar turned to the year 1927. That year, a man named Leonid Kulik set foot in the region, 19 years after the event. Kulik was the head of the Petersburg meteorite collection. In 1921, he had read about this phenomenon in a newspaper and had become obsessed with the subject. For years, he tried to convince the scientists in the Soviet Union to explore this region, but he never received a positive answer. However, he did not give up and continued trying to convince the science lobby. He himself had said that something whispered to him in a way that he needed to go to Tunguska. However, when no positive result came from the authorities in any way, an idea came to his mind. He thought he could go on this exploration by telling the authorities that there was probably a valuable iron meteorite there, and that this meteorite would be a great gain for the Russian economy. And he did it. He finally got the budget, gathered his team, and set off. But as we said, getting there was never easy. Without God's help, it was nearly impossible to pass through Siberia in the winter. Because while the cold is a major challenge, it is not the only one. The frozen rivers, the swamps in the region, the swarms of mosquitoes that deeply unsettled people. And as if all these challenges were not enough, on top of it all, there were the natives. When the research team arrived at a small town named Vanavara, the locals did not help them. The reason was simple: they believed the region was cursed. According to the native people, the god Agdi, who is the god of thunder, fire, and lightning, had come to that region. On that morning of 1908, Agdi had descended to Siberia and scorched that forest. From that day on, the native people did not step foot in that region in any way. And this situation was a bad situation for Kulik, because he could not find a guide to be able to go to the region. However, in the end, in exchange for flour, cloth, and building materials, he had convinced a guide named Ilya Potapovich. On March 27, 1927, when they climbed Mount Shakrama accompanied by the guide, Kulik looked down and froze. Trees flattened for kilometers. They were all leaning towards one side, just like waves spreading outward from the eye of a storm. However, right in the center, one tree was still standing upright. A scorched, dried out, but untoppled tree. Kulik called these the telegraph pole forest. He analyzed the terrain and came to this conclusion. The massive event had come right from the top and went straight down. The trees in the center did not topple because of this, because the pressure waves spread towards the right and left sides. The trees in the center were not impacted by this pressure, but everywhere around them was flattened. However, the crater that would prove where the stone fell still could not be found. And the thing we call a crater is the pit a celestial body opens on the ground when it falls to the earth, for those who do not know. When Kulik could not find the crater in the forest, he thought the meteor was inside the swamps. And it was time to research the swamps, which would take about 3 years. For 3 years, he tried to drain the water in the swamps. He excavated dozens of times but found nothing. All he had left was useless, decaying tree stumps and swamp mud. Unable to endure it anymore and realizing he made a mistake, he left the swamps in 1930. The cause of these swamps was not a meteor, because there is constant cold, snow, and water as a product of snow in Siberia. The soil mixing with this water as a result of subsidences in the lands had created the swamps. This event is called thermokarst. So in conclusion, there was no crater, no piece, no trace in hand. However, something had come to Kulik's mind. When he looked at the trees from the hill, he noticed that the trees grew tilted due to the impact that occurred earlier. In order to get information from the trees in a country like this, Kulik and his team cut their trunks and examined the rings inside. If there are those among you who do not know, each ring in the inner trunk of the tree is a year for the tree. There was a sudden and sharp drop in the ring corresponding to the year 1908. The reason for this was this colossal energy release. This impact found in the inner trunk was also concrete proof of this event, meaning the trees were not lying. And the impact area of this massive event was not just Siberia. Later, when looking at the seismic waves, they had been recorded in Petersburg, in Berlin, in London. Even you will be surprised, but in Washington. And here comes the part where you will be really surprised. For the 2 nights following the massive event, people in Paris could read books at night without street lamps. People in London could take photos in the evenings without a flash. The reason for this was that the dust particles thrown into the air in Tunguska had reflected the sunlight. The phenomenon that occurred inside Siberia, which is practically an ice age environment, had illuminated the nights of Europe. Now, think about this part. No one knew anything about the event. What the object was remained unknown. Research was delayed a lot, and people were arguing for years about what this was. Scientists were saying other things. People were producing conspiracy theories, and some native peoples were saying God descended from the sky. So there were many claims related to the subject. But back then, this was not a simple question to answer either. In this part, however, we cannot ignore Kulik's effort. He came to the place that no one thought was important. He came 19 years later. And he opened the door to this discovery. Thanks to him, people now knew that Tunguska was real. Whatever happened 19 years ago, as a result of it, the trees were still lying there. The forest still smelled of scorched wood, and whatever had occurred, its mystery was still not solved. Something completely unknown fell into a forest. The power of this thing was truly massive something, with the power of 185 times the most devastating human-made events recorded in modern history, and it disappeared without leaving any trace. This is truly eerie. For decades, many scientists of the world would interpret the answers to all these questions. The most colorful and craziest conspiracy theories would be laid on the table. And sometimes answers even came from imagination, not from science. Was this incoming thing a message from aliens, or was it a black hole colliding with the Earth? And many more interesting theories like this bred. Nikola Tesla also has a comment regarding this situation. However, before coming to that part, I want to share some information regarding Kulik. Kulik went to Tunguska 4 times in total, and each time he was there researching more, learning more and spending much more of his time there. However, he had returned empty-handed each time. And when the year came to 1942, He was taken into custody by opposing forces during a major global conflict and passed away in an internment facility. The man who introduced Tunguska to the world had passed away without ever learning what really happened there. So, what was the truth lying beneath this object? Or what exactly was this object? The answers to this question are truly extensive, because most of them were created not by science, but by imagination. But of course, let's start with the science part together first. However, one more problem appears before us here. Science, too, could not make an inference regarding this subject for many long years. According to science, the first serious theory was this. It was thought that a meteor had descended upon this region. That is, it was believed to be a piece of stone or metal coming from space. The person who brought this event to light, Kulik, also thought this way. But the problem here was the crater that Kulik too searched for and couldn't find. Logically, if something descended from space, it would create a hollow on the ground, depending on the object entering the atmosphere. The crater area would also grow. As an example of this, we can look at the meteor crater in the Arizona desert. The diameter of the crater there is approximately 200 meters, and the diameter of the meteor that impacted there was much smaller than the one that reached Tunguska. So if there was a meteor involved, it should have completely altered that region of Siberia. So this means the phenomenon was not a standard meteor event. Then what was it? Some scientists thought that the object which brought this massive impact to the region could be a comet. A large part of comets consists of ice, and when we consider that this object, disintegrating in the atmosphere, superheated before reaching the ground, this theory seems logical. According to many people, too, it was believed for years that the object which descended on the region was a comet. That was until the year 2013. When a similar but much smaller version of this phenomenon was experienced in another city in Siberia. An asteroid, approximately 20 meters in diameter, broke apart in the atmosphere. Almost 500 people were adversely affected, and thousands of windows shattered. The scientists analyzing this event reached a new opinion regarding the Tunguska phenomenon. The asteroid in the Tunguska event was highly likely a stone. It was approximately between 5 and 80 meters, and its weight was around 100 tons. When it entered the atmosphere, the heat slowly disintegrated it, and it vaporized before reaching the ground. However, because the energy of this structure would be tremendously powerful, it had left such a result. This too might seem very logical, but there is a problem here as well. This explanation is logical, really logical. But scientists searched for meteorite remains in Tunguska for decades and found almost nothing. A small amount of cosmic dust, some magnetic particles, abnormal iridium traces in tree resins, but there is no concrete, holdable, weighable piece, and this absence took people to more interesting places. In the year 1973, two physicists put forward a very different claim. The two physicists, named Albert Jackson and Michael Ryan, stated in their theories that the object in the Tunguska event was not an asteroid or a comet, but a mini black hole. Yes, you didn't hear it wrong, a black hole. Yes, a small black hole in that endless part of the universe which does not contain sound or light entered the Earth. The part it entered corresponded to the Siberian region, and it had exited from its other side. For this reason, they had said that a crater did not form on the ground. There was no crater because the black hole had not impacted anywhere. It had simply passed through. No matter how crazy it sounds to the ear, there were people who believed and took this theory seriously too, because when you look at it, you cannot completely refute this theory. Yes, really, there was no crater either. However, there was, of course, a question mark regarding this theory as well. If the entry point of this black hole was Siberia, where was its exit point? Right at this part, in order to calculate the exit point, scientists determined a trajectory by looking at the object's orbit and speed. The result they found was the North Atlantic Ocean. They said that if a massive event was experienced in the North Atlantic Ocean during that period, this theory would be correct. But such an event had not been experienced at that time. In the year 1908, no abnormal event had been recorded in the North Atlantic. Because the North Atlantic was the route for many ships during those periods as well, when these ship owners were asked and the records were examined, it became certain that there was no abnormal situation. Consequently, this theory, too, slowly started to be put away onto the dusty shelves of history. But even though the idea itself did not see much interest, it was still kept in mind. The next theory was one that Hollywood would love, had aliens landed in that region. In the year 1946, a science fiction writer named Alexander Kazantsev acted before Hollywood and penned this event. Looking at the devastating human-made event recorded in modern history around that time, and looking at the object that descended on Tunguska, he had seen that neither of them left a crater, and both created a massive mushroom-shaped phenomenon. Noticing this, Alexander wrote a story. According to his story, the thing that descended on Tunguska was a spaceship with an advanced atomic engine. When we look at this claim today, it looks quite funny. Can there be a spaceship with an atomic engine? Or why should we feed a highly reactive element like uranium into an engine? It's interesting. So, this spaceship with an atomic engine had completely disintegrated because of a malfunction and had impacted that region, according to what Alexander wrote. However, the bad part here is that people interpreted this as if it was real and believed in it. As if this fictional story was not enough, two Soviet researchers put forward one more theory in the 1970s. The two researchers, named Alexei Zolotov and Felix Zigel, examined the flattening directions of the trees in the Tunguska region and claimed this. One part of the trees was leaning to one side, while the other part was leaning to another side. For this reason, they claimed that the descending object had changed its direction. And this, they said, was impossible to see in an object that cannot be controlled. A natural object could not change its route. Only a controlled object could change its route. This claim, too, like the other claims, had made a huge impact. However, of course, afterwards, this claim was refuted too. The trees had a leaning position in this way not because their flattening directions were controlled or because the object changed its route, but because it progressed in an inconsistent way. And this was already consistent with the behaviors of an asteroid entering the atmosphere and starting to disintegrate. However, this space subject had fascinated people, and it didn't look like it was going to fade away either. And afterwards, Nikola Tesla came into the picture. More accurately, Nikola Tesla's name was dragged into this event. In the year 1908, Nikola Tesla was working at the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. This tower represented one of his biggest dream projects. He wanted to transmit electricity to the world wirelessly. Using the air as a conductor, he wanted to transmit the energy in America wirelessly to regions thousands of kilometers away. Tesla was really obsessed with this subject and was developing extraordinary ideas, and no one understood what he was doing either, or they weren't smart enough to understand. His chief financier, Morgan, had cut the funding. Tesla, on the other hand, was bankrupt and hopeless. Right in this period, meaning on June 30, 1908, a massive phenomenon was experienced in Siberia. Some people's claim was this: Tesla operated his tower at full power that day, and an energy of millions of volts shot into the sky. That energy that went into the air created a massive impact on the ground in Siberia. To support this theory, a few analyses were made, and a line was drawn from the Wardenclyffe Tower to Tunguska. It was known that Tesla wanted to direct a signal towards the North Pole in that period. Perhaps he missed the target, it was said. According to this theory, Tesla powered up the tower and looked at the analysis reports after the trial. The story is nice but incomplete and definitely does not reflect the truth. In the year 1908, Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower had already lost its function. The financing was cut and the tower was not active. Another point is that Tesla never reached the colossal energy levels seen in Tunguska, because the energy there was very big and Tesla never had such a massive power. The New York electricity grid in those periods could not even meet 1,000th of the power requested for this launch. But still, this theory was really liked by people, because Tesla is really one of the greatest men in the history of science and a person who had the potential to do this. Of course, he would not willingly carry out such a devastating event. However, a man known for his eccentricities could have done such a wild thing. But of course, this is not reality. Not a fact, so what does science say today? The asteroid that disintegrated over Chelyabinsk in 2013 changed everything. That event was broadcast live. Thousands of cameras recorded it. Scientists were able to analyze that massive phenomenon millisecond by millisecond. And when they compared it with Tunguska, a much clearer picture emerged. The Tunguska object was highly likely a stony asteroid. It progressed in the atmosphere for approximately 12 to 15 seconds. During this time, its heat reached millions of degrees, and it completely disintegrated at an altitude of 8 to 10 kilometers. The disintegration was so sudden and intense that the object practically vaporized. The only thing it left behind was a giant wave of energy directed downwards. This wave swept across Siberia, and 80 million trees were flattened in an instant. And right here, there is a very interesting point. This wave did not just topple the trees. The Evenki reindeer herders living in regions close to the center were separated from their animals. Hundreds of reindeer were entirely displaced in an instant. Some herders recounted that their hair was scorched and their ears rang. It was reported that an Evenki man, only 30 kilometers away from Vanavara, was thrown from his place by the force of the massive event and was adversely affected by hitting a tree. The only reason the Tunguska phenomenon had almost no loss of life was this: the forest was almost empty. If this massive energy release had occurred over London, the entire city would have been completely altered. The entire city. Thinking about this is deeply unsettling, because this happened once, so it can happen again. Approximately 8 kilometers north of the impact point, there is a small lake named Chico. It is oval-shaped, deep, and has a very different structure from the swamps around it. Some researchers claimed that this lake was not included in the maps of the region before 1908. If so, this lake could be a remnant of the event. Perhaps a small piece of the asteroid had descended there. But comprehensive research conducted in 2017 refuted this claim. The sediment layers at the bottom of the lake showed that the lake had existed for at least 280 years. Meaning, long before 1908, a dead end again. No crater, no piece, no trace, only 80 million flattened trees, and still unfinished questions. And at this point, it is necessary to stop and ask this. Why couldn't an answer be found for such a long time? Why have people still been arguing for over 100 years? The answer is actually simple. The event was very large, the region was very desolate, and the first team arrived very late. Kulik, who came 19 years later, had missed a large part of the evidence. The forest had started to grow again. The swamps had changed. The rain had washed everything away over the years. And most importantly, the object itself had completely disintegrated. Physically, nothing was left behind to be tested, examined, or analyzed. Science was working in a vacuum, and the vacuum always fills the story, sometimes with science, sometimes with imagination. In Tunguska, both were tried. So can this happen again? We have to ask this question because Tunguska was an accident. No one planned it, no one warned us. The object came, completely disintegrated and went. And in 1908, the world was not ready for this. So what about now? The 15th of February, the year 2013. Russia's Chelyabinsk city. Children were going to school in the morning, adults were going to work, and drivers were driving their cars. An ordinary morning, and then a light appeared in the sky, a light brighter than the sun during the daytime. People stopped their vehicles, took out their phone cameras and started looking, and then the colossal energy release came. An asteroid, approximately 20 meters in diameter, disintegrated in the atmosphere over Chelyabinsk. The sheer power of the event was equivalent to massive historical proportions, meaning approximately 30 times the most devastating human-made events recorded in modern history. But the object was small and broke apart at a high altitude. Nothing impacted the ground. Still, 500 people were adversely affected, mostly from broken glass, because as the pressure wave passed over the city, it shattered thousands of windows. A severe impact was felt across 6 cities. Factories shook and schools were evacuated, and that asteroid had not been detected until it entered the atmosphere. It came completely unnoticed. 105 years after Tunguska, we were still not ready. There is a category that NASA refers to as near-Earth objects today, asteroids and comets passing near the Earth's orbit. There are more than 30,000 near-Earth objects detected so far, and approximately 2,000 of these are in the potentially hazardous class. Potentially hazardous. Do you know what this expression means? It refers to objects whose orbit is close enough to intersect the Earth's orbit and whose diameter is larger than 140 meters, meaning they are much larger than the Tunguska object. The Tunguska object was around 50 to 80 meters. What does 140 meters mean? Longer than a football field. And there are 2,000 of these just from the ones we were able to detect. The ones we could not detect are a separate issue. But here, there is an interesting development. In the year 2022, NASA directed a spacecraft named DART to intercept an asteroid. This asteroid, named Dimorphos, did not pose any threat to Earth, but NASA wanted to try a concept. Is it possible to deflect an asteroid from its orbit? The answer was yes. DART successfully intercepted Dimorphos and changed the orbital period of the asteroid by 32 minutes. 32 minutes may seem small, but in space, 32 minutes means a very big difference. If an asteroid is going to collide with the Earth, and if it is intervened with early enough, its orbit can be changed. If, and it is necessary to underline the word if, because this method works, but for this, 2 things are needed. First is to detect the object in advance. Second is to have enough time for intervention. The asteroid in Chelyabinsk could not be detected. The Tunguska object could not be detected either. If these had been bigger, nothing could have been done. Now let's stop for a second. 80 million trees were toppled in Tunguska. 2,000 square kilometers of forest was severely impacted. And this was the massive impact created by an object that did not impact the ground. An object that completely disintegrated only in the air. If this object had been a little bigger, it could have impacted the ground without fragmenting in the atmosphere. Then what would happen? Scientists calculated, if an asteroid 200 meters in diameter impacts the ground, it completely alters everything within a 100-kilometer radius from the point of impact. An object 500 meters in diameter can affect an entire continent, and these are still objects counted in the small category. Much bigger things are wandering in the solar system, but let's not go to such a dark place, because Tunguska's story is not just about devastating effects and fear. Tunguska is a place still visited today. Scientists still go there. They take soil samples, they examine the trees, and they scan the swamps. Every 10 years, a new analysis method emerges, and Tunguska is taken under the magnifying glass again. And one of the weirdest details of the Tunguska event is related to the light that came before the massive phenomenon. The massive energy release happened at 7 in the morning. But the night before, meaning the night of June 29, people noticed a strange occurrence in many parts of Europe and Russia. The sky was unusually bright. In some places, there was enough brightness to raid even at midnight. This happened one day before the event. What is the explanation for this? Perhaps the object, before entering the atmosphere and while approaching the Earth, compressed the air in front of it and ionized it, and this illuminated the sky. Or maybe the dust particles spilling from its tail entered the atmosphere and reflected the light. We don't know for certain. And this is the most honest thing that can be said about Tunguska. We know that something came. We know that a massive phenomenon happened. We know that 80 million trees laid on the ground, but we still do not know 100% exactly what happened. Now let's take a step back. June 30, 1908. Morning 7:17. In the middle of Siberia, over a forest where no one lived, an object completely disintegrated. With a power of 185 times the most devastating human-made events recorded in modern history. It didn't impact the ground, it didn't leave a trace, but the trees laid down. And those trees for 19 years just laid there in a forest that no one saw. Kulik came. He came 4 times. 4 times he returned empty-handed. And in the end, he passed away in an internment facility without being able to solve the secret. But the thing Kulik started did not stop. For decades, scientists went there. And slowly, piece by piece, even if incomplete, they reached an answer. Highly likely a stony asteroid. Approximately 50 to 80 meters, 100,000 tons, and it disappeared by vaporizing in the atmosphere. Is it satisfying? Partially, but it's still not certain. And the Tunguska event teaches us this. The universe is big and we are small, and from time to time the universe reminds us of this. Sometimes with a small thing like Chelyabinsk, sometimes with a bigger thing like Tunguska, and throughout history it has reminded us with much bigger things. Like the asteroid that collided with Chicxulub 66 million years ago, that impact led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Tunguska was not that big, of course, but it was big enough to explain something. The sky is not empty, and we are not always ready, but maybe we are a bit more ready now. The DART mission worked. Asteroid tracking systems are developing. Early warning networks were established, and maybe one day when the next Tunguska object comes. This time we will know beforehand. This time we will be ready, or we won't be, we don't know, but at least we continue to ask, and this is much better than never asking at all. And here we stand, June 30, 1908. Siberia. Morning 7:17. Something came, completely disintegrated, and went. 80 million trees lay on the ground. 2,000 square kilometers of forest were completely altered. The pressure waves circled the Earth twice. People in Paris could raid at night. Photos were taken without a flash in London. And on the ground at the scene of the event, there was not even a single crater. For 19 years, no one went. Then Kulik came. He came 4 times. 4 times he returned empty-handed, and he passed away in an internment facility without being able to solve the secret. Tunguska consumed him but could not stop him. After him, others came. Asteroid theory, comet theory, black hole theory, alien theory, Tesla theory. Each presented an angle, each brought an answer that seemed logical, but none completely closed it. And today, we still do not have a definitive answer. It was highly likely a stony asteroid, but not 100%, and science does not close things that are not 100%. This uncertainty might seem frustrating. I understand. People want definitive answers, especially regarding such a massive phenomenon. But sometimes history does not give us a definitive answer. Sometimes the most honest thing is to say this, we do not know exactly. And this, too, is an answer. Perhaps the most honest answer, but we know this. Tunguska was real. Something happened there that morning, and that phenomenon can happen again. Next time, it might not be in the middle of Siberia. It might be over a big city, on the coast, at a port, or in a crowded area. And if a sufficiently large object comes, whether we are ready or not becomes a matter of ultimate survival. In 2022, DART worked. Dimorphos's orbit was changed. This is good news. Really good news, but there are still thousands of objects we cannot detect, and you cannot escape from what you cannot detect. Chelyabinsk was unknown until 2013. Tunguska was a complete surprise in 1908. When will the next surprise come? We don't know, but maybe we are a bit more ready now, and maybe this is enough. Tunguska taught me this. The most interesting parts of history are not always major global conflicts and empires. Sometimes it is an unexplainable silence in the middle of a forest. Sometimes 80 million trees lying on the ground. Sometimes a single question that remains unanswered for years. What happened there? And the answer still hasn't fully come. If it comes, maybe one day. If it doesn't, Tunguska will continue to keep its mystery. Inside the icy silence of Siberia, under the decaying trees at the bottom of the swamps, some places do not want to tell what was experienced. Tunguska is like that, too. Sergei Semenov hid under his table that morning. 65 kilometers away from Tunguska, in his yard, he was having breakfast. The sky split in two. He felt his shirt scorching. His ears were overwhelmed by the sound. And then everything passed. Sergei survived. He went into his house. He continued his life. But he never forgot what he saw that day. He told it until he passed away. It was as if the sky had split in two, he said. It was as if it was a massive upheaval. Maybe it was, a localized massive upheaval. A profound phenomenon experienced in the middle of Siberia, in a place no one saw. And we, over 100 years later, are still trying to understand that profound phenomenon. If you liked this video, do not forget to click the like button and subscribe to History for Sleep. Write this to me in the comments. Which theory do you believe for the secret of Tunguska? Asteroid, comet, or something completely different? I am really wondering. See you. One more thing. While researching this story, I realized that Tunguska is not just an event. It is a mirror. The mirror of how humanity deals with big questions. What do we do when we don't know? We produce theories, we write stories. Sometimes with science, sometimes with imagination, we fill the gaps. And this is perhaps one of the things that makes a human human. We cannot stand uncertainty. We absolutely want to find an answer. Tunguska has not fully given that answer yet, but we continue to search.